Hello everyone, and welcome to this SOLIDWORKS 22-minute webinar. This one's called PLC Design and Automation with SOLIDWORKS Electrical. My name is Cliff Bendling and I'm going to be your host, and we're going to jump right in and get started as we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. And with that, I want to go ahead and launch the first poll question. So what CAD tool is currently being used for PLC and schematic design that you're using now? So paper napkin, 40%, and then equal amounts of AutoCAD, electrical, and AutoCAD. Okay, good. And then you know what? I'm going to run this next poll question, and then we'll introduce our presenter today. So, how many of your current projects would be classified as similar but different? 45% of you, around 50% similar but different. Excellent. I'll hide that, and I just want to introduce our presenter today. Thomas Smith is currently a technical manager for SOLIDWORKS ECAD Solutions. Before that, he was in the control design industry, and then he owned his own electrical design company before coming to work for us at SOLIDWORKS. And with that, Thomas, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Cliff. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to everybody in attendance to this webinar. We always appreciate you guys taking time out of your days to join us. So continuing on, a little further introduction on myself. So as Cliff stated, I am the technical manager here at SOLIDWORKS, focusing on our electrical products. I currently reside in Denver, Colorado, as I support our central and west territories of North America. Yeah, I have a lot of varying range of expertise in background in the electrical design. As Cliff stated, I was a controls designer in industry, and then I've worked on multiple different applications as a consultant, and now on this side. So that's enough about me. Let's dive into the reason why everybody is here. And so we're here today to talk about PLC design and automation and the capabilities that are found within inside of SOLIDWORKS Electrical. And so as we go through this webinar, our agenda is as follows. We're going to start with an introductory PLC overview of, again, how the tools work within inside our application and common background elements. We will also be taking a look then at dynamic PLCs and those tools, and then ultimately we will be ending with PLC automation and looking how we can truly streamline and automate your PLC drawings. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into things. So starting off with the PLC overview. So we got a PLC. What is a PLC? As most of us on this call probably know, a PLC is a programmable logic controller. Essentially, it's an industrial computer system that's programmed to continuously monitor the state of input devices. And then based upon the programming that is behind that, it can make automated decisions that control the state of output devices in any given electrical process control circuits. So this can involve, multiple inputs and outputs that are, programmed with a dedicated software to accomplish those specific tasks. And due to the flexibility the PLCs offer, we have to have flexibility now within the way that we actually design these applications. And taking a step back, when we look at how PLC design is handled in traditional CAD tools, we get a, kind of a common statement around that. And by traditional CAD tools, I mean a non-intelligent ECAD tool. And so, within those workflows and in those environments, managing our PLC drawings and data, is often a painful, time-consuming, and error-prone process. This is all due to the fact of the manual labor and the manual effort that is required to maintain, create, and work with these designs and these projects. So, every piece of text must be edited. Even if you guys are copying and pasting designs, all of the manual edits rely on a human to type the information in and then to modify any secondary files that might be associated, independent bombs, PLC reports, etc. So it's all manual. And again, anytime the human's involved, we have an error or a increased chance for errors, typos, etc. So, if that is the state that you're currently in and you're ready to, come out and escape the dark ages, then, there are and there is, SOLIDWORKS Electrical, and we have purpose-built tools within inside of our application that can help streamline this process. So with that, diving in, there are two primary ways that we can manage the PLC data within SOLIDWORKS Electrical. The first one is the individual option, and this allows the creation and management of all your PLCs individually. We also have a secondary method that allows for the creation of a rack. And so this is going to be a modular system where we can have varying slots that contain different I/O types. And so, the applications can vary. So within our tool, we can support both of those aspects. Now jumping into the actual functionality that we have. So we work inside SOLIDWORKS Electrical with PLCs. We have what is called a dynamic PLC. This tool allows us to have a lot of flexibility in the way that we design and lay out our PLC cards and our PLC racks, whether we're defining the cards and the specific functions and data related to each specific input and output. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. So when it comes into the dynamic PLCs, we're going to first start by talking about the PLC configurations. Essentially, we're going to look at creating and modifying configurations, which in this instance are essentially template files that standardize the appearance of our generated PLC modules and any associated drawings that we might use for the automation phase. And again, these are a way for us to achieve standardization, capture that, and then use it as a repeatable configuration going forward. And then we're actually going to talk about how to create the PLC by creating a PLC mark, adding the PLC symbol, and editing it, all with the dynamic PLC tool. All right, so again, as I mentioned, the configurations are the opportunity for us to set a standard for our PLC design. There's going to be two options for how those are handled. We can store those on an application level, or we can assign them to a specific project, where one project could have a PLC configuration laid out in one manner, and another project independent of that can have its own configuration. So there's multiple ways of assigning those configurations, again, whether they're held at the application level or specific to a project. Within these configurations, there's a bunch of options that we can go in and start modifying that controls these drawings. Essentially, this is the aesthetics of it, and it will control the appearance and the layout and the information that is contained within. So just a little extended view of that, we can do general things, again, specify size, attribute tracking information, position within the drawing, and circuit data, as well as different file information. And so when those configurations are set and implemented within our application, it aids in everything I'm about to show, creating the PLC and then ultimately downstream with the automation. So let's talk about creating a PLC. There's going to be multiple workflow options available when working inside of our application. I am going to focus in on a single method just due to time constraints, and if you have any more interest, we can always explore other opportunities at another time. So here we got options of creating a new PLC. So we can simply go to a location and assign a new PLC mark. At that point in time, we are generating a new component that resides in our project. So we are going to get the component properties, which gives us an opportunity to come in and assign any metadata that we would want to at that time, as far as description data, manufacturer's data, etc. But one of the ways that our application helps improve accuracy of our drawings and reporting is due to our library structure that we have. So we're a SQL database driven application, and then we have libraries within there. One of those libraries being our manufacturer's part library. So we can assign a manufacturer's part to it at this time as well, and then based off the manufacturer's properties as specified from the supplier, all the terminal information and input address formatting, etc., will come down with that manufacturer's part. So when the manufacturer's part is applied, so we now have a component in our project that is defined properties and a symbol, we simply have to click insert that PLC. Upon inserting that PLC, we're going to get another dialog box, and this is really where the flexibility comes in. with being able to design and lay out our I/O cards on the fly. So in our dynamic insertion dialog box, we can select, as you can see up top in this first highlighted box, that we can select those configurations. So as I just mentioned, we can create a standard configuration for our PLC drawings. Me and my team can select that, standardized configuration, and all of our appearances will be based off of essentially that template. And then in addition to selecting your configuration, there's other layout options that you can fulfill within this dialog box as far as adjusting the orientation, assigning and associating circuits, and even turning the visibility of various inputs or outputs off at that time. Again, it is this level of flexibility where the value is added versus just the, the very static tools that you're left with in traditional CAD tools. And then after all that is specified, ultimately, it is going to generate your card in the form that you have stated in your configuration file. So whether that is horizontal, vertical, ladder logic based, etc., all that is being driven by that configurations file. But once you click that, it knows the symbols, the addresses as defined through the dynamic PLC insertion. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. As we look at this workflow live, we're going to, just keep an eye out for the streamlined workflow and how, within that we have the flexibility in the design. So, we're working through dialog selection boxes, allowing us to manipulate and manage that data on the front end, and how we can, accurately pull this information out of a defined library and associate that with our symbols, and then ultimately the management of change. So with that, let's jump in. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to come up within my user interface and I'm going to go over to the Projects tab, and I want to start by taking a look at a PLC configurations. So one of the things that we can set, as I mentioned, is that template file. What we're looking at here are the two that are assigned on the application level. I'm going to go ahead and customize one and assign it here to my project. So this now resides on the project level and will be utilized for this particular layout. Now once inside here, I can start editing things to customize it, such as the name. Here's where I got the physical layout properties of the actual module, various attributes of where I want them to be placed in context of that module. How's it going to fit inside the drawing? Again, a bunch of different, details. In this case, we're looking at circuit type, so I could define, so this is going to be an analog PLC output. If it is, what direction, is that coming from, and is there going to be any associated symbols, representative of that within this. So I could come out and select, various elements as defined and really manipulate and modify this as needed. And again, this helps with the customization and standardization of your PLC designs across your enterprise. So now that I have created that configuration, what I'm going to do is start adding a PLC. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go to my location and I'm simply going to add a new component. So I'm going to go down here and add a PLC mark in this case. When I add that PLC mark, you're going to see all the tagging has been done, the hierarchy is defined. I could specify manufacturer's data, descriptions, etc. But in this case, I'm actually going to go over to my library and I'm going to search that manufacturer's database that I mentioned. So this is standardized content that's available to my entire team. I have powerful filtering capabilities in here that'll help me easily locate the part numbers that I'm after. In this case, I'm just going to simply type in my reference number here, search that database, and locate the one that I'm after. When I find it, I can select it, add it, and assign it to the component that I just created. As you can see there on the right, and when I close this here, that all the associated terminals as defined by the manufacturer came over and are ready to interact within our application. So now I got that PLC component. I'm just going to go over here real quick and open up a PLC drawing. Go back to my Components tab, and here, because I had all that manufacturer's information specified, I can simply right-click in my context menu and come down and select Insert PLC. And now you're going to see I have that dynamic PLC insertion dialog box on the left-hand side. I have an opportunity to come up and select my configuration if I wanted to select my custom one. I can turn off, on and off, various features, as you can see, in this example. as that changed and simply place that. I could continue to place the other segments of this as I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and end that, and you can see, that we have my module. And, so that's it in a nutshell. As you can see with the dynamic PLC tool, you get a lot of power, to customize and set this up the way that you need on the fly, saving you, all the time of having to manually manage all that data that's associated with the PLC module. So now let's get into the automation side of things. When we asked that poll at the beginning of this of how many of your designs can be classified or your projects can be classified as similar but different, it was majority of everybody, 50% and above, said that that's half of what you guys do. And if that is the case, features like PLC automation is really where you can see some value, because if we can capture various elements of those designs and automate it for reuse, but at the same time have it configurable for the various changes, then that can really affect things downstream and allow you to design quicker and get your products out quicker as well. So as we talk about PLC automation, we're going to look at three things that, or four things in this case, that all go in conjunction with that. And so we're going to look at the opportunities that we have to create and manage our IOs. We're going to look at the associating macros, working with the feature within the tool called a data grid, and then ultimately automating these PLC drawings. So the first thing, as I mentioned, we're going to start with is talking about, ways of creating and managing IOs. Our application, unlike other CAD tools, is a purpose-built tool. So we have things such as what you're seeing here on your screen, which is the PLC manager, that we can come into that gives us a lot of control and options when working with these PLC cards. So from here, I can add PLCs to my project, and then I can go even further into each card and start really manipulating the various inputs and outputs, and we'll take a look at some of those options. But we get a lot of control found within these dialog boxes that gives us access to a lot of data, all of our project data related and contained within. Inside of that, going a step further into that, we have ways of, again, continuously coming deeper, and now we can come on to a input or output level and come in here and really, work in various aspects to assign macros to these. We can start working with what is called data cards, and just really assigning the functions and properties to each one of those. Once the IOs have been created, assigned, and configured, we can then start associating macros to those IOs. And essentially what a macro is, for those of you who are not aware, in our tool, that is a circuit. So it's a combination of components and wires that are placed as a single unit but function independently. So essentially what we can do is, with this tool, we can say, for this input, I want you to place this circuit. And then when we automate the creation of our PLC drawings, not only are we placing the module, but we're actually putting in the inline components as well, all through associating a given macro to the IO point. And so again, you have access to a macro library that is shared amongst your entire team, allowing for standardized content reuse. After that, we can start working with another feature within our PLC manager. So just a continuation of more tools within your tool bag, is one of those being the data grid. And the data grid is a way for us to manipulate information within the PLC manager in a more, I'd say, user-friendly manner. So it takes us into like cells and rows like Excel, and in fact you can copy and paste things. So if you had description information or some type of manufacturer's data or PLC data contained within a spreadsheet, simple copy and pasting of cells within these will allow you to quickly get the data and reuse that. Now, there are a bunch of other options that are available within this dialog box. So if you slide the slider at the bottom, we get some custom user properties that are available. If those are something you want to take advantage of for further reporting and tracking within your various deliverables, those can be customized by there at the bottom of the dialog box. You can select customize, and then you can go in and put a better description or a custom field in there to track the various project attributes that you're looking to manage. All right, and so once you've, assigned, configured your I/O points, and if you had any macros that you wanted to associate, and you configured anything you wanted to in the data grid, the last step is to automate those PLC drawings. And really, what is nice about this is, again, we had all that flexibility and configurability as we're designing it. Now when it comes time to create the drawings, we just have to click a button. A couple of things are working together when this happens. When we click Generate Drawings, it's utilizing a project configuration file, which we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, which specifies the appearance and look of it, and then it's gathering the data as specified in the PLC Manager, and then creating the drawings with title block information, and then all the metadata associated with the PLC modules. So we can create those, and then depending on the size of your project, you would have all your PLC drawings with inline components placed in with that click of a button. All right, so with that, let's go take a look here, look at the streamlined workflow, look for that, look for the flexibility in design, and again, the accuracy that we're seeing from the library-driven system. So let's jump in and take a look at that. Okay, so within here, the first thing that I'm going to do is come into the PLC's Manager. So now here on the PLC Manager, you're going to see I have a couple options. I could do like I did the first time and add a mark, but this time I'm going directly to a manufacturer's part. So, very similar to what we saw before, I am going to place my reference part directly in this dialog box and filter on that to quickly get to my file. So I am going to add that to the component. It's going to bring over all that circuit information as defined by that. If I select onto my PLC, you can see I get that property information that I just defined when I created this component. I'm going to add a quick description in here for that, and then just close that. So you can always manipulate the properties. Once I select on that, if I come down here to the lower grid, you're going to see I can get really detailed into this PLC module with the various inputs or outputs. Now here I'm going to select 4 specific inputs, and I'm going to add a new PLC input into this. Now what this is allowing me to do is if I go in here to my Inputs and Outputs Manager and I start to search into here, you're going to see that those 4 inputs that I added are available here. I'm going to select those 4 and create or save those into a macro. And now I'm going to associate my 4 inputs that I've just defined. So now they all got their mnemonic value, and I'm going to associate them with a specified function that I had defined for this project. So I'm going to assign those 4 inputs into my F1 tank fill function. So I'm creating that and assigning those inputs. Once I go through with this, I'm going to expand my tank fill so that you can see those 4 inputs are associated with that. I'm going to remove those 4 as they're no longer needed. So again, we have a lot of power of what we can do there. I'm going to come back and we'll take a look at some of the other options I have in here again. So I'm going to fully associate these. So I'm taking those 2. Now what I'm doing is I've created, but now I'm associating them to their circuits. So there you see I got a dialog box that I said I had 4 inputs that are now associated with 4 circuits. So I have the circuit connection. I'm going to come back into my I/O Manager, and now I'm going to add some additional outputs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 5 outputs into my irrigation function. So you can see this time I added them directly to the function instead of adding them independently and coming in here. But I added those guys to the function. Now I have defined and configured my 5 outputs. I'm going to select those, and then the last thing I need to do is associate these guys to their circuits as well. Coming into the irrigation, locate my 5 digital outputs, and if I can get clicking and select. So again, I got the confirmation, 5 inputs, 5 outputs have been associated with 5 circuits. Now, one thing I do want to take a look at, I want to go back in here to the Inputs, Outputs Manager, and I want to talk about the data grid. So if I expand those functions and I select the inputs or outputs, depending on what you're working with, I have the option to go into data grid. Now, as I mentioned, the data grid is an area where we can quickly come in and start modifying and working with data, such as descriptions or any other user and custom fields that you want to track. Here, you could copy and paste from Excel, you could type it in, whatever your method is to reuse that data, you can get it in quickly. But it is a easy interface in which to interact and work with to get your data in. And so you can quickly populate. So I'm putting in description information for each I/O point, really easy. And now what I'm doing is I'm associating those macros that I talked about. So when it's going to place this input, it's going to place also this macro or this circuit that's associated with that I/O. And so for each one of these points, I just come down and associated a given macro. All right, and so just taking a look at these, coming back into the data grid again, just showing that information, going to throw in some descriptions for my outputs here real quick, get those put in. And now we'll take a look, once all this information is done, about a few other tools and features that we have within this manager before we actually generate these drawings. So we've configured, and worked with this card and defined some input and output information. There are some other ways that we can manipulate this card before we actually generate these drawings, giving us, another level of control and flexibility on this appearance. So, I have some inputs that I don't want to include in this, so I can simply select those inputs that I want, multi-select these guys, and then I can right-click on there. And one of the options is to hide those symbols from being inserted. So I don't have to worry about having, those blank spaces represented. I can also come in this case, I'm going to add an automated page break into this. So it knows where to hit the break, automated, for when I generate those drawings. I just got a couple of other terminals here that I'm going to hide, and then we'll get up and generate these PLC drawings. I know we're getting close on time, but if we come up here, one thing I'm going to point out before I run this is under the configuration. This is where I select that PLC template, essentially, that controls and standardizes my appearance. Once all that's defined, I'm going to click Generate Drawings, specify where I want them to go in my project, and then sit back and let the magic happen, per se. Now, again, depending on the size of your project and the PLC designs that you're working with, will all impact this. It's going to generate, I get the OK message, and then I'm going to go ahead and go over, I'm going to open up one of my drawings here and get it to go, and you can see I got my output card with all the inline devices that I needed as well. So just to recap, SOLIDWORKS Electrical with our PLC designs will help remove the pain, the time consumption, and the errors that are all associated with the manual process that is found in a non-intelligent CAD tool. And so, if you're interested in learning more about SOLIDWORKS Electrical and how we can help, streamline your workflow, improve your accuracy, and automate your PLC drawings, then, don't hesitate to reach out to your local VAR, or you can visit solidworks.com for more information.